our Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees. It's Super Week, which means a new episode every single day for an entire week, just to get us in the mood and to get us excited for Germany Euro 2024. And who better to start this Super Week off on England legends than the former West Ham captain and the 1966 winning England captain, Bobby Moore. Before we get into this episode on Bobby Moore, let's do a few of your shout-outs which have come in on Patreon. Firstly, a huge, humongous, massive, gigantic shout out to Leckhampton Rovers under-8 Pumas, and that is from Ruben, who's aged 8 and from Cheltenham. Well, Ruben, a huge shout out to you, your football team coaches, and everybody else who's got anything to do with your football team, Leckhampton Rovers under-8 Pumas. Thank you very much for being a listener, and thank you even more for being a super listener. The next one says, "Hi Darren, could you please give a shout out to Thomas and Cara in Dublin, Ireland?" Well, there you go. Thomas is 8 and plays for Portsmouth FC, I hope I pronounced that right, but is sadly out of a broken elbow and he really misses playing. Oh no, Thomas. Well, I hope that you get fixed up and you're better and you're back to playing football very soon, but a huge shout out to you. And also to Cara, who is 5 and is starting to play the beautiful game next month. So a huge, massive shout out to the pair of you, and thank you both for being super listeners as well. And the next one is a huge shout out to Paget Titans and Inter Milan Panthers. And that is from Molly and Milo in Bermuda. Well, that is a very nice place to be listening to the podcast from. So a massive shout out to you two and every single person in your team, and thank you both for being super listeners as well. And the last one is an enormous shout out for Alfie and Patrick McNulty, who are 2 massive fans of the podcast. They've been listening since the podcast started nearly a couple of years ago, and they are both super listeners. They love Manchester United and Silgo Rovers, if I've got that right, who is their local team in Ireland. I've probably completely butchered the name of that team, but hopefully I was somewhere close. Well, a massive shout out to you two, Alfie and Patrick. Thank you so much for being listeners, and I really hope that you enjoy this episode. Right then, let's get into the first episode of Super Week on England legends, and this England legend, the brilliant Bobby Moore. Robert Frederick Chelsea Moore, aka also known as Bobby Moore, was born on the 12th of April back in 1941. Bobby was born in Barking, only a couple of miles away from the Boleyn Ground, the stadium which Bobby Moore would play hundreds of games in for West Ham. We'll get to that stuff later on. Bobby grew up in the 1940s and 50s in the east of London, when times were seriously tough. He lived through World War II and lived through a time of big challenges when nothing was really that easy. Bobby went to Westbury Primary School and then to Tom Hood School. And like many kids in the 40s and 50s, he played a lot of football at school. You had to be good to get into the school team and represent your school. And Bobby was a talented footballer from a young age. He played for both schools in both school teams. At around 15 years old, Bobby Moore would join a club that would go on to change his life and change the lives of football fans in East London. Bobby joined West Ham United as a youth player. He made his way through the youth system, which would have been very, very different back then in comparison to how it is now. And he was known for being a very talented footballer from the word go. He had the will and desire to win at all times, and this made him stand out. After a couple of years of playing in the West Ham youth teams, Bobby got his call up to play for the first team. It was a Monday night in September 8th to be precise, 1958, and Manchester United were coming to town. A fresh-faced, eager but nervous Bobby Moore made his debut in the famous claret and blue of West Ham. The captain of the team was a man called Noel Cantwell, and although Bobby was just 17 years old, he could see how good Bobby Moore was, and he urged the manager to play the kid. Noel's extreme confidence in Bobby's ability was a major part in Bobby Moore making his way onto the pitch as a senior player for the first time at just 17 years old. West Ham won that game against Manchester United, beating them 3-2, and Bobby, who was a defender, was solid throughout the match and was said to have stood out for all of the right reasons. This made him a regular face as the games went by. Back in the 1950s, West Ham were known for having one of the best training academies in European football, and it was from this moment on that West Ham went on to have some of their most successful moments. From a young age in the West Ham squad, Bobby was known for being a confident defender, one that the team and manager could trust. One of his teammates at the time said that he would sometimes run behind Bobby when a ball was coming towards him at full speed, just in case he couldn't control the ball and it slipped through. But out of the hundreds and hundreds of times that it happened, Bobby controlled the ball with his first touch. He had one of the best first touches in football, and he practiced it all the time. Bobby Moore from a young age was called up to represent his country of England. In 1958, he was a part of a team who played in the UEFA tournament, where Bobby and his teammates took England all the way to the final, but unfortunately lost to Italy. That sounds familiar, doesn't it, England fans? A couple of years later, Bobby was called up to play in the under-23s England side, where he would yet again flourish, playing with positive body language and showing the managers of the senior team what sort of player he was. He was so good in the under-23 side that in 1962, England were on their way to South America to play in the Chile World Cup. And without a single senior cap to his name, Bobby Moore was stuck on the plane and was a part of the World Cup squad for England. England made it to the quarter-finals of that tournament, but were knocked out of the competition by Brazil when they were beaten 3-1. Brazil would go on to win the whole tournament and be crowned world champions for the second time. England were solid in that tournament, and so was Bobby Moore. Around a year after the 1962 Chile World Cup, where both England and Brazil were brilliant, Bobby Moore was made captain of his country. Not only is this an honour and a privilege for any player to play for their country, but to be a captain, and to be a captain after only 12 appearances, and to just be 22 years old, is quite remarkable. This made Bobby Moore the youngest footballer in English history to wear the captain's armband. Bobby was a true leader, and someone at such a young age had players of all ages looking to him. Back to West Ham, and Moore was simply sensational, making match-saving tackles game in, game out. Not only was he great defensively, but he was great on the attack as well. He had a vision for football. He knew exactly where and when to send the ball. He knew how and he knew when to make a run, and he knew when he needed to stay put. In 1964, and as captain of West Ham, Bobby Moore and his teammates got themselves to the FA Cup final, where in front of 100,000 fans they beat Preston North End to lift the FA Cup for the very first time. It was a huge moment for West Ham, Bobby Moore, and for England fans as they looked at the captain of the club and let their minds just gently drift to what could be in the up-and-coming 1966 World Cup, which would be held at home in England. 1966 came, and it was time for England's World Cup, where Bobby Moore would captain the side in all of their games that would be played in the old historic Wembley Stadium. They went on to play West Germany in the final and beat them 4-2 in a thrilling match which stopped the world in its tracks. Bobby led his men up to the royal box, where a very young Queen Elizabeth II presented him, the captain of England, the World Cup trophy. A picture of Bobby holding the World Cup was taken shortly after this, and it has become one of the most famous football pictures of all time. If you want to learn more about the 1966 World Cup, I've done an episode called 1966 and a Dog Named Pickles. In that episode, you will hear all about how England won the World Cup and about a dog named Pickles who saved the day. Have a search through the podcast to find that episode and the many others that I have done on all things England. Back to Bobby Moore. England had won the World Cup for the first time ever. Bobby Moore was the captain and he led his team to do it, and now he was back playing for his beloved West Ham. Moore was going into his 9th season with the Mighty Hammers at this point. He had become a sporting icon and one of the most famous people in the world, and certainly one of the most loved people in the country. In 1966, he won the BBC Sports Personality of the Year award. He was the first footballer to win the award, and it was nearly 2.5 decades before another footballer was awarded that award. By this point, Bobby had played hundreds of games for West Ham and had established himself as a West Ham legend. But he also became a bit of a legend for one night only, under some rather unusual circumstances, when he captained the Greek side Olympiakos in 1972. It was a friendly match against a Brazilian team. And how the story goes is the country of Greece had some problems to do with politics. Basically, there was lots of adults arguing over who was right and who was wrong and blah blah blah. Bobby Moore got a call to play for the Greek side for one night only, where it's fair to say he was given a lot of love. The game ended in defeat for Bobby's side that night, but it was a memorable evening for everyone involved, including Bobby himself. In 1970, another World Cup had come round and Bobby Moore was the captain once again. He led his men into the tournament. England made it to the knockout stages of a 1970 World Cup, but were beaten by West Germany 3-2, who got their revenge for that final 4 years before at Wembley Stadium. After 16 seasons and 646 appearances for West Ham, this part of Bobby Moore's journey was to come to an end. Bobby joined Fulham, who were in the division below, Division 2, and he made over 120 appearances for them, before he finished his playing career at clubs in Hong Kong, America and Denmark, to name a few. Like all good players though, they can't go on forever, and eventually they have to call it a day and hang those boots up. Bobby finished off his footballing career in management with Southend United, and he left football not only as West Ham's greatest ever player, an FA Cup winning captain, but the man who led England's men's team to their only ever major tournament win and became a sporting icon. I hope that you've enjoyed listening and learning about all things to do with Bobby Moore, a man who will never ever be forgotten and a player who will be spoken about for many years to come. So remember, if you know someone who loves football just as much as you do, then please tell them about Football for Kids, and whether you're playing football soon, watching it on the telly or pitch side, I hope that you enjoy the game. See you next time.